A young, ambitious engineer sets out to prove his authority, only to discover that the quiet old laborer he tries to humiliate might be the greatest builder the country has ever seen. The late summer heat in Dallas was the kind that clung to your skin and made the steel beams sweat. Even in the fading light of evening, the air shimmered above the fresh-poured concrete, thick with the smell of dust, diesel fumes, and something faintly metallic from the sparks of welding torches. The site stretched across nearly 5 city blocks, fenced in with weathered chain link and draped in blue tarps that fluttered weakly in the warm breeze. From the outside, it was chaos piles of rebar, stacks of lumber, trucks reversing with shrill beeps. But inside the gates, there was an order to it all. The men moved with a rhythm that only came from months of working side by side. Voices called out measurements over the grinding of saws. Forearms glistened with sweat under the Texas sun, and every clang of hammer against steel seemed to fall. In time with the next dot, these weren't men fresh out of trade school. They were veterans of construction sites, some with 30 years behind them, others young but already hardened by the work. Each one knew his place, his tool, his purpose. On a good day, they worked like a living machine, loud, gritty, but precise. That balance was about to change. The first sign of something different was the low growl of an engine outside the gate. A black SUV rolled in slowly, its glossy surface so spotless it might have just come off a showroom floor. Heads turned. Work slowed, not stopped, but slowed as the truck came to a halt near the foreman's station. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Ryan Coleman. He didn't look like a man who belonged to this world of dirt and grit. Early 30s, clean-shaven, hair neatly combed in a way the wind didn't dare disturb. His shirt was crisp and dark blue, the kind with hidden buttons under the collar, and his boots, though the steel-toe type, looked as if they'd never touched mud. He wore a brand-new white hard hat, the corporate logo shining under the slanting sunlight, and he carried himself like someone who knew exactly who was in charge before even speaking. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man with a sunburned neck, gathered the workers with a few short whistles and hand signals. Ryan stood at the center of the group, looking over the faces dark with sun, lined with fatigue, marked by years of labor. He scanned them the way an appraiser might scan a row of antique tools, noting condition, imagining their usefulness, deciding what could be replaced. "My name is Ryan Coleman," he began, his voice clear and controlled, cutting through the noise of the site. "I was sent here by corporate to get this project back on schedule. I don't care how hot it gets, how hard the work is, or how long the days run. I care about results. I want progress. I'm not here to make friends, and I'm not here to listen to excuses. If you can't keep up, step aside." It was the kind of speech that left no room for warmth. A couple of the younger men exchanged glances, smirking slightly, as if to say they'd heard this song before. Others kept their eyes down. Off to the side, leaning on the handles of a wheelbarrow, stood Sam Whitaker. 63 years old, hair the color of frost, but thick as ever, skin tanned and weathered from decades under the sun. His hands were a map of calluses and old scars, each one tied to a job, finished and done right. His faded work shirt was rolled. At the sleeves, his jeans stained from years of honest labor, his boots worn, but sturdy. Sam wasn't the loudest on site, nor the fastest, but everyone knew he was the man you wanted if you cared about something lasting. He had a quiet authority that came not from orders barked, but from the example he set. People watched him, even when they didn't mean to. They trusted him, maybe more than they trusted the men in the trailers with the blueprints. Ryan's gaze passed over Sam without a flicker of recognition. To him, Sam was just another laborer number on a payroll list. As the meeting broke, Ryan stepped closer to the assistant project architect, a wiry man in his 40s, who had been on the project since the first day of excavation. "That guy," Ryan said with a tilt of his chin toward Sam. "Who is he?" "That's Sam Whitaker," the architect replied. "Best hand on the site. Knows more about foundation work than most of the engineers in the office." Ryan's mouth tightened. Just slightly. "Experience without precision is nothing," he said under his breath. Sam caught the look, not the words, but the look. He'd seen it before, the cool, dismissive glance of a man who believed the value of a worker could be read in a resume instead of the walls he'd built. Sam didn't respond. He shifted his grip on the wheelbarrow handles, nodded to the younger guy beside him, and walked back toward his station. But the air felt heavier after that. Something had changed. Ryan Coleman had stepped onto the site like a gust of wind through an open door, disrupting the heat, stirring the dust, and making it clear to everyone that the next few weeks would not be like the last. And whether they knew it or not, his arrival would soon draw a line between two very different kinds of builders. The ones who worked for recognition and the ones who worked for the work itself. The following morning, a Dallas sky was the color of dull steel, heavy with the promise of rain. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and fresh lumber through the site. Work had started early, as it always did. Jackhammers spitting sparks, forklifts groaning under the weight of concrete blocks, and the steady rhythm of hammers striking wood. Ryan Coleman arrived just after 7, the sound of his boots on the gravel sharp and deliberate. He carried a rolled-up set of blueprints under one arm, his eyes scanning the site, like a man inspecting a crime scene. It didn't take him long to find something he could pick apart. At the south end of the site, a fresh section of wall had been laid the day before. It stood clean and solid, the mortar lines crisp, the edges sharp enough to catch the light. Sam Whitaker's team had done the work. To most eyes, it was flawless, but Ryan wasn't most eyes, at least. That's what he believed. He stopped cold in front of the wall, lips pressed into a thin line. He gave a short, piercing whistle that sliced through the noise of the site. One by one, heads turned. Workers set down tools. The buzz of the saws died. "Everyone stop," Ryan ordered. The crowd of hard hats began to form around him. The kind of circle men make when they know something uncomfortable is about to happen. Sam was still over by the mixing trough, but the moment the whistle blew, he knew it was about him. He walked forward with an even pace, wiping his hands on a rag, his face unreadable. Ryan tapped the wall with the end of a metal ruler, the sound ringing like a gavel. "Who built this?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the air. A few glances darted toward Sam. One of the younger workers, barely 20, shifted on his feet and mumbled, "Mr. Whitaker's crew, sir." Sam stepped forward, his tone calm and steady. "I supervised every step." Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed strangely in the stillness. "And you're proud of this?" The question wasn't really a question. It was a blade. Wrapped in words. Sam kept his gaze steady. "It'll stand longer than anything else here." Ryan's eyes narrowed, and his voice rose just enough for everyone to hear. "Your lines aren't perfectly aligned. Your mortar mix is too dry. And the corner angle? Off by half a degree. This isn't craftsmanship, it's a liability." The words landed hard. A few men lowered their eyes. Others clenched their jaws. The insult wasn't just to Sam. It was to the years of skill every man there carried in his bones. But Sam didn't flinch. "Maybe it doesn't meet your numbers," he said quietly, "but it'll hold through more storms than you've seen." The tension in the air tightened like a rope. Ryan stepped in closer, closing the gap between them. "And what authority do you have to tell me how a structure should be built?" "No authority," Sam replied, his voice steady as stone. "Just the years." It wasn't loud, it wasn't defiant, but it carried weight, the kind that made a man's chest tighten. Ryan's eyes swept over him boots to gray hair, and the corner of his mouth curled in something between a smirk and a sneer. Tell me, Sam, who taught you to build like this? The crowd shifted slightly, sensing the shift from criticism to something sharper, humiliation. The question was meant to strip him down, to make him answer like a boy called to the principal's office. Sam's answer came without hesitation. A man who built half this country with his hands and his heart. Ryan smiled not kindly, but like a gambler who believed the cards were about to turn in his favor. Good. Tomorrow morning, you're going to build a structure right here, in front of me, alone, no help, no excuses. I want to see if you're half as good as you think you are. A murmur rippled through the workers. A public challenge. In construction, that was more than a test. It was a spectacle. Sam looked at him for a long moment, his face still calm, then gave a single nod. I'll be here. No protest. No argument. Ryan turned sharply, walking away as if the matter was already settled. The workers slowly drifted back to their stations, but the air was different now, charged, waiting. They all knew what tomorrow would bring. And deep down, so did Ryan. The next morning, the first pale light of dawn crept over the Dallas skyline, stretching long shadows across the skeletal frames of half-finished towers. The site was unusually quiet for that hour. No jackhammers, no trucks rumbling over gravel. Just the occasional metallic groan of scaffolding in the early breeze. Word had traveled fast. By now, everyone knew. Today was the day Sam Whitaker would be put to the test. It wasn't written on any schedule, but the challenge hung in the air like a storm about to break. Men who normally wouldn't glance twice at each other were whispering in low tones, nodding toward a cleared section of ground roped off with bright orange safety tape. That patch of dirt had become an arena. By 7 o'clock sharp, Ryan Coleman appeared. His uniform was as immaculate as the day before, crisp navy shirt, white hard hat gleaming, boots polished. In one hand, he carried a rolled-up blueprint, in the other, a clipboard. His walk was slow, deliberate, the kind of walk that said he owned the ground he stepped on. He didn't look at the crowd gathering near the roped-off section. His eyes went straight to the spot where Sam stood. Sam had arrived long before anyone else. His work clothes were faded from years of sun and rain, his boots stained from more jobs than he could count. He carried no plans, no fancy tools, just his battered leather tool belt and a trowel so worn it had molded itself to his hand over decades. Ryan stopped a few feet away and held out the blueprint. This is the design. Exact measurements. No more, no less. Every line, every angle must match this to the millimeter. His voice was sharp, but not loud, more like a knife sliding across glass. You can only use what's on site. No outside materials. No help. Sam took the rolled plan, glanced at it briefly, then set it on a nearby sawhorse. He crouched to inspect the pile of materials, stacks of concrete blocks, bags of cement, a few buckets of water, a bent level, a steel square, a rusted measuring tape. He nodded once, as though confirming he had everything he needed. Ryan crossed his arms, flanked by a couple of young engineers who were already grinning, like they'd come to watch a guaranteed failure. The first sound was the scrape of Sam's trowel against the inside of a bucket, mixing cement. The crowd didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. There was something hypnotic about the way he worked. His hands didn't fumble, didn't hesitate. Each movement flowed into the next like steps in a dance he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Before by mid-morning, the structure had begun to take shape. Not just a wall, but a frame with clean, precise lines. Sam never once looked rushed. When he checked a level, it was with a single glance, no adjustments needed. When he set a block, it settled into place as if it had been waiting for that exact spot its entire existence. Men who had gone back to their own work found themselves drifting back toward the rope. A few pretended to be organizing tools. Others leaned on shovels, but their eyes never left Sam's hands. Ryan remained still, his clipboard untouched. But the smirk he'd worn earlier had faded into something tighter. Around noon, the clouds broke open for a moment, sending a shaft of sunlight over the site. It landed squarely on the structure, making the edges of the blocks look like they'd been cut with a blade. Sam wiped the sweat from his brow, took a slow sip of water, and went right back to work. By 3 in the afternoon, it was done. The crowd had grown larger: laborers, supervisors, even a few office staff from the trailers. Sam stepped back, setting his trowel down with a quiet finality. The structure stood flawless, not just matching the blueprint, but improving it: cleaner joints, smoother edges, a symmetry so precise it almost felt unnatural. Ryan walked toward it slowly, running his hand along the mortar lines, checking the corners with his steel square, measuring angles. He found nothing to correct, not a fraction of an inch off. "This doesn't prove anything," Ryan said finally, his voice lower now, as if speaking too loudly might shake the thing and reveal a flaw. Sam met his gaze calmly. "Want me to tear it down and do it again?" The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. For the first time, Ryan didn't have an answer. He turned on his heel, his words clipped. "My office. Tomorrow morning." Sam gave a small nod, as though he'd known this conversation would happen from the start. Without another word, he picked up his tools and walked away, leaving the crowd staring after him and leaving Ryan Coleman with a question he didn't yet know how to ask. The next morning, Ryan Coleman sat alone in his office trailer, blinds half closed against the glaring Texas sun. The duel from the day before kept replaying in his head, not just the precision of Sam Whitaker's work, but the way the man moved, calm, methodical, as if every single step had been decided long before he took it. Ryan was a man who believed in control. He controlled schedules, budgets, blueprints, crews. But yesterday, watching Sam, he'd felt something rare: uncertainty. It had a weight to it, a heaviness in his chest he hadn't shaken all night. At exactly 8 o'clock, knock came on the door. "Come in," Ryan said, his voice flat. Sam entered with the same unhurried gait as always. He didn't remove his hard hat or sit down until Ryan gestured to the chair across from him. Ryan laced his fingers together on the desk. "I'm not going to deny it. What you built yesterday was impressive, more than impressive. But it raises questions." He leaned forward. "Who exactly are you, Sam?" Sam's face didn't change, just a construction worker. Ryan narrowed his eyes. "I checked the employee files. There's almost nothing on you. No previous projects listed, no certifications, no union records worth mentioning. You've been in the trade for decades, but there's no trail." Sam said nothing. Ryan continued, his tone sharpening. "One of our investors saw pictures of your work from yesterday. Said it reminded him of a man they used to call Hands of Stone. A master builder who could lay out an entire structure without a single drawing. Ever heard of him?" A flicker passed through Sam's eyes. Barely there, but Ryan caught it. It was recognition not of the name, but of the memory it carried. Sam looked down at his calloused hands, then back up. "No. Sounds like a nice story." Ryan leaned back in his chair, studying him. "It's more than a story. That man worked on some of the most ambitious projects in the country, then disappeared without a trace. Some say he walked away at the peak of his career. Others think he was forced out. If you know something, this is the time to say it." "I don't," Sam replied evenly. The air between them was thick with unspoken things, questions Ryan didn't know how to ask, truths Sam had no interest in offering. A knock on the door broke the moment. It was the project coordinator, holding a folder. "Ryan, quick thing, you'll want to see this." She handed him a photo from a recent investor event. On the back, scribbled in pen, was a note. "His technique is identical to Hands of Stone. If you have him on site, you're sitting on a gold mine." When Ryan looked up, Sam was already standing. "Anything else?" Sam asked. Doc Ryan hesitated, then shook his head. "No, that's all for now." Sam nodded once and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Ryan sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the photograph. The edges of the mystery were starting to take shape, but so was something else. A quiet, knowing sense that whatever truth Sam Whitaker carried, it might be bigger than both of them. By Monday morning, the duel was already old news, but the legend of it was only beginning to take shape. It didn't spread like an official memo. It bled through the cracks of daily life on the site. At first, it was just a passing comment during a cigarette break, someone mentioning how clean Sam Whitaker's lines were, how the mortar had set without a single crack. Then, one by one, stories began to surface, half-truths, memories warped. By time, maybe even outright fabrications. But in the heat and noise of the Dallas construction yard, nobody cared whether they were real. Men began speaking of Sam as if he were two different people, the quiet man they worked beside every day, and the mythical figure who could bend stone to his will. One of the welders, a man named Kenny, swore he'd seen Sam years ago working on a federal installation near El Paso, the kind of place with guards and no signs on the gates. Another claimed Sam had once finished an entire stretch of retaining wall in Oklahoma before the incoming storm could topple the first section. Whether true or not, each telling seemed to gain more weight than the last. And the more they spread, the more Sam became something other than just another pair of hands on the site. It started subtly. Workers began glancing toward him when they were stuck on a problem. A couple of rookies trailed him during breaks, watching how he cleaned his tools, how he loaded a wheelbarrow, as if there were secrets hidden in the smallest motions. Even men who'd been in the trade for decades found themselves listening to the cadence of his hammer, the measured pauses between his movements. Ryan Coleman noticed it. At first, he told himself it didn't matter. Men liked their stories something, to pass the time while they sweated through 12-hour shifts. But the shift in the air was undeniable. Conversations quieted when he approached. Crews moved more readily when Sam asked for something than when the foreman did. It wasn't insubordination, it was loyalty. And loyalty, Ryan knew, could be dangerous if it wasn't aimed at the right person. On Wednesday evening, as the last of the crews filed out, Ryan stayed behind in his office trailer, the hum of the AC filling the space. He turned his chair toward the window and watched Sam cross the yard alone, carrying a coil of rope over one shoulder. He moved with the steady, unhurried stride of someone who'd been on 1,000 jobs and knew exactly how to pace himself. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about the comment the investor had made. His technique is identical to Hands of Stone. That name had been bouncing around in his head since he first heard it. Finally, he reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. His father answered on the second ring, his voice rough with age. "Ryan, everything all right?" "I need to ask you something," Ryan said, glancing at the blinds to make sure they were drawn. "You ever hear of someone called Hands of Stone?" The silence that followed was sharp, almost metallic. "Where'd you hear that name?" His father asked finally. "An investor mentioned it. Said there's a guy on my site whose work is identical." Ryan could almost hear his father sit up straighter on the other end. "If that's true, you're working alongside a ghost. What's that supposed to mean?" "He was the best I ever saw. Could raise a structure faster and cleaner than any man alive. Didn't need a set of plans, just looked at the space, at the materials, and knew exactly where everything belonged. I worked with him once, decades ago, on a courthouse build-in. Kansas. People said what he did wasn't possible, and yet there it stood. Ryan frowned. Then why doesn't anyone know his name? Because he walked away. One day, in the middle of a job, he just left. No speeches, no explanations. People looked for him, companies, government contracts, but it was like he'd vanished. Some say it was pride. Others say he got tired of building for people who didn't care what they were building. Ryan didn't speak for a moment. He kept picturing Sam's hands scarred, deliberate, each movement weighted with purpose. You think this man, this hands of stone, could be working as a laborer in Dallas? His father's voice was low, certain. If it's him, don't underestimate him. Men like that aren't accidents. They're storms in disguise. Ryan ended the call, but didn't move from his chair for a long while. Outside, the sky was dimming, streaked with the last red light of day. Somewhere beyond the yard, he could hear the faint clang of tools being packed away. The next morning, the site had a new visitor. A man in a pale gray suit stepped out of a sedan that looked out of place among the battered pickups and cement mixers. His name was Mark Rivera, one of the project's key investors, and he wasted no time. After a brief meeting in Ryan's office, he asked for Sam. When they met, Rivera extended his hand. I've seen the photos. I've read the measurements. What you built the other day, there's not an architect on this team who could have done it better. I want you to lead something special. A commemorative structure in the central plaza. A landmark. When people walk through this place, I want them to feel it before they even see it. Sam didn't answer right away. He looked past Rivera at the cranes overhead, at the half-finished buildings around them. Finally, he spoke. I'll build it. But my name doesn't go on it. Rivera blinked, surprised. You don't want credit? No. The investor hesitated for only a second, before nodding. Fine. Just give us the structure. As Sam walked away, Ryan stood in the shade of the office trailer, watching the exchange. It wasn't just the fact that Sam had been chosen for something important. It was the way he'd agreed on his own terms, without bending to anyone's expectations. And Ryan couldn't shake the thought that this was only the beginning, and that whatever came next, he might not be the one in control. The designated space for the commemorative structure didn't look like much at first. Just a flat patch of dirt near the heart of the development, bordered by yellow caution tape and a few wooden stakes hammered into the ground. To the untrained eye, it was just another rectangle waiting for a foundation. But the morning Sam Whitaker walked onto that patch, it stopped being empty ground. He didn't arrive with fanfare. No speeches, no announcements. Just that same battered leather tool belt, the same old trowel that fit his hand like it had grown there. He paced the perimeter slowly, boots sinking slightly into the soil, his eyes scanning every corner as if reading something invisible written on the earth. Ryan watched from his office trailer, arms folded. There was something unsettling about the way Sam moved. No notes, no measurements, no visible reference. Just awareness. It was as though the man already saw the finished monument in his mind, and everything from here on out was just putting reality in line with that vision. By mid-morning, a few of the younger workers had wandered over, curious. They weren't assigned to the monument, but they lingered nearby, pretending to organize materials. When Sam began mixing mortar, one of them stepped forward without being asked, holding the bucket steady. Sam gave a quiet nod and kept working. That's how it started. By the end of the first week, there were half a dozen men around him each day, some offering tools, others fetching water, a few just watching. There was no formal instruction, no drawn-out explanations. Sam rarely raised his voice above the hum of the site. Yet the men learned. They began to move differently, slower, more precise. checking their work, not because someone told them to, but because they felt the weight of doing it right. Ryan saw it, and it gnawed at him. It wasn't about speed or deadlines anymore. Monument was turning into something else, a kind of unspoken center of gravity. Workers who had nothing to do with it still stopped by during breaks, touching the smooth edges of newly set stone, asking quiet questions about the design. And every time, Sam gave them the same kind of answer, grounded and strangely memorable. One afternoon, a young apprentice named Miguel asked him, "How do you know exactly where each stone goes without marking it first?" Sam placed a block, pressed it into place, and looked up. "Because the stone tells you where it belongs. You just have to listen." The boy nodded, as if it made perfect sense. From the window of his office, Ryan muttered under his breath, "It's not magic. It's just construction." But even as he said it, the words didn't feel right. That Friday, Ryan got an unexpected visit. It was Ricardo Bennett, a local journalist known for covering architecture and urban development. He stepped into Ryan's office with a worn leather satchel and a voice full of quiet conviction. "I'm here for the man building the monument," he said. "This is an active site," Ryan replied sharply. "We're not giving interviews." Ricardo didn't flinch. He reached into his satchel and laid a thin folder on Ryan's desk. Inside were old black and white photographs, bridges, civic buildings, even a cathedral under construction. In the corner of each photo was the same figure, a younger man, his hair already streaked with gray, his stance as steady as stone. Ryan's pulse kicked up. The face was familiar. "You recognize him," Ricardo said softly. "Don't bother denying it." Ryan closed the folder. "What's your point?" "My point," Ricardo said, leaning forward, "is that you're not just building a monument here. You've got a living legend working under your nose. And you have two choices either. You'll let him finish what he's started, or you'll spend the rest of your career explaining why you stopped him." Ryan didn't answer as Ricardo left. Ryan looked out the window again. Sam was there, placing another stone, the sunlight catching the silver in his hair. Around him, men stood in quiet focus, their movements unconsciously mirroring as Ryan felt something unfamiliar curl in his chest. It wasn't just unease anymore. It was fear. By the second week of work on the monument, it was no longer just a project, it was a magnet. Men who had been with the company for years, who rarely strayed from their assigned zones, now found excuses to pass through the monument area. Even those with no stake in its progress lingered, leaning on shovels, wiping their foreheads, quietly watching Sam Whitaker set each stone as if he were revealing a secret one layer at a time. The monument itself was taking shape, but not in the way Ryan Coleman expected. It wasn't grand or towering. It was compact, deliberate, built with a symmetry that made even incomplete sections feel complete. There was something in the proportions, the way each curve led the eye, the way the shadows fell exactly where they should. That gave the work an almost unsettling perfection, and that perfection was pulling the site's focus away from everything else. One afternoon, a lanky 20-year-old apprentice named Jake walked up to Sam with the kind of question that carried more weight than it seemed. "Why don't you run the site? You know more than half the people in the office." Sam didn't pause in his work. "Because I didn't come here to run things. I came here to build." Jake frowned. "But if you were in charge, you could make everyone do it right." Sam set a stone into place and looked the boy in the eye. "Knowing how to do something doesn't mean you should control it. And having control doesn't mean you understand it." The words settled into the humid air, like concrete setting in a mold. Jake nodded slowly, as if the answer was heavier than he could carry. From the far side of the yard, Ryan watched the exchange with his jaw tight. He could see what was happening. These weren't just casual interactions Sam was shaping the mindset of the crew, and he was doing it without trying. The men weren't quoting Ryan's orders. They were repeating Sam's quiet phrases. That night, Ryan met with the architect in charge of the overall design, a seasoned man named Leonard Price. They sat in the office trailer over lukewarm coffee, the floor vibrating from the distant thud of a late-night delivery truck. "They're starting to look at him instead of me," Ryan said, his tone clipped. Price didn't even look up from the sketches he was reviewing. "And maybe that's not a bad thing." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Not a bad thing? He's a laborer. My crew is supposed to follow me." Price finally looked at him, his gaze steady. "They're following the man who's showing them what quality looks like. Maybe you should be asking why that isn't you." The silence that followed was sharp. Ryan said nothing, but the thought festered long after Price had left. A few days later, a busload of civil engineering students arrived for a scheduled site tour. Their professor, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, insisted they see the monument first. When they stood in front of it, the students fell silent. Then came the questions: how the angles were so exact without laser measurement, how the curves seemed mathematically perfect despite being shaped by hand. One student, skeptical, pulled out a laser level. After several minutes of checking, his voice was almost reverent. "Margin of error is less than a millimeter. That's impossible." Their professor stepped forward, tracing the edge of a freshly set stone. "This," he murmured, "is geometry in its purest form. Not from theory, but from instinct." Phones came out. Photos, videos. By that evening, clips of Sam's work were making their way across social media feeds, shared by architecture blogs, admired by craftsmen's forums, and even reposted by a few professional organizations. Ryan saw it happening in real time from his office, watching the numbers climb. Likes, comments, shares. The caption on one of the videos made his stomach tighten. "Built without blueprints, better than a computer model." The next morning, the site felt different. There was an energy in the air, the kind that comes when everyone knows they're part of something extraordinary. But for Ryan, that energy felt like a current pulling him out to sea. Because every wave of admiration for the monument was one more step away from his control, and he could feel the undertow getting stronger. It was late afternoon when Ryan Coleman decided he'd had enough. The monument was nearly complete, and the site buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with him, nothing to do with the corporate schedule. All eyes seemed to be on Sam Whitaker, whether he was laying a final stone, speaking a few quiet words to a young apprentice, or simply walking past with a bucket of mortar. Ryan told himself it wasn't jealousy. It was leadership. "The crew needs to remember who's in charge," he muttered under his breath as he climbed the steps to the office trailer. But even as he said it, something in his gut told him he was lying to himself. That evening, after the last hardhead had left for the day, Ryan stayed behind in the dim hum of the trailer. He wrote an official order, clinical, impersonal, removing Sam Whitaker from the monument project effective immediately. Administrative decision, the paper read. Reassignment to general labor duties. The next morning, the heat rolled in early, pressing down on the site like a heavy hand. Sam was at the monument before sunrise, adjusting the keystone of an arch that would frame the structure's entrance. The stones caught the golden light in a way that made them seem almost warm to the touch. Ryan approached with the folded document in hand, his steps deliberate, each one sinking slightly into the soft dirt. "Sam," he said, his voice sharper than he intended, "put down your tools." Sam straightened slowly, his expression calm but unreadable. "What's the problem?" Ryan handed him the paper. "As of now, you're relieved from this section. A different crew will finish it." The words fell like a steel beam hitting the ground, abrupt, loud in their silence. One of the younger workers nearby froze mid-step, his hands still gripping a wheelbarrow handle. "What? Why?" "It's not personal," Ryan said quickly, keeping his eyes on Sam. "It's an administrative decision." Sam looked at the paper, then back at Ryan. His voice was even, but there was a weight behind it. "If you think someone else can finish it right, let them." He began wiping his hands on an old rag, moving with quiet finality. That's when it happened. First, the young worker with the wheelbarrow set it down. "If he's out, I'm out." Another man followed. "I didn't come here to lay bricks from a piece of paper. I came here to work with him." Then another, and another. Within minutes, half the crew in the monument area had stopped what they were doing. Tools dropped, gloves pulled off. Word spread across the site faster than any foreman could stop it. Whitaker's been pulled from the monument. By the time Ryan realized what was happening, the hum of work had turned into a hollow stillness. Machinery sat idle. The air felt heavy with something unspoken: anger, disbelief, maybe even grief. Leonard Price, the project architect, arrived moments later, his voice low but edged. "What did you do?" "I did my job," Ryan snapped. "I can't let this turn into some cult of personality." Price shook his head. "A cult of personality? He's building the heart of this project, and you just ripped it out." Ryan held his ground, but the sting of the words stayed. That night, the site felt abandoned. Even the air seemed still. Sam didn't return the next morning. No one knew if he'd quit, or if he was simply staying away out of principle. But Ryan knew one thing: without him, the monument looked like a skeleton with no spirit. And the men felt it too. 3 days passed. The monument sat half-finished, its unfinished arch jutting against the sky like a sentence cut short. The site went on, machines rumbled. Trucks delivered materials. The hum of construction never stopped, but something essential was gone. The rhythm was off, like a song missing its melody. Ryan Coleman felt it most in the quiet moments, when the noise of the site dipped and the absence became impossible to ignore. He kept telling himself it was just another project, that one man didn't define an entire build. But deep down, he knew he'd made a cut that had bled the heart out of the work. The crew was different now. Men moved slower. Conversations were muted. Laughter had vanished. A few refused to even look Ryan in the eye when he walked past. On the 4th night, Ryan stayed late in the trailer, the hum of the fluorescent light overhead pressing into his skull. He opened a drawer and took out an old photo one his father had given him years ago. It showed a younger version of his father, standing proudly in front of a monumental structure. Beside him was another man, broad-shouldered, silver beginning to thread through his hair, eyes calm and steady. Even in the faded print, the familiarity of that gaze was unmistakable. Sam Whitaker. The date scrawled on the back read 1993. Beneath it, in his father's neat handwriting, to Sam Whitaker, the man who taught me without words. Ryan stared at the inscription for a long time, his throat tight. For years, he'd chased the idea of outdoing his father, of proving himself the better man. But looking at that photograph, he realized he'd been competing against someone he didn't even understand, a man who had already chosen to walk away from recognition because it wasn't what he valued, and Ryan had thrown him off a site for the same reason. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, Ryan left the trailer and drove across the city to a narrow street on the south side. The address had come from one of the younger workers, a boarding house where Sam was renting a small room. He knocked. When the door opened, Sam stood there in his worn work shirt, the faint smell of fresh coffee drifting out from inside. Expression was neutral, but his eyes carried that quiet watchfulness Ryan had seen so many times on the site. "I need to talk to you," Ryan said, his voice stripped of its usual edge. Sam stepped aside. Inside, the room was sparse a bed neatly made, a small table with a single chair, tools stacked carefully in the corner. Ryan placed the old photograph on the table between them. You remember this? Sam picked it up slowly, his thumb brushing over the image. Your father, he said after a moment. He was a good man. Impulsive, stubborn, but good. Ryan swallowed hard. He wrote on the back. Bet you taught him without words. Sam set the photo down. He listened. That's all it takes. Ryan hesitated, then said what had been gnawing at him since the day he signed the removal order. I thought leadership was about control, about being the one people follow. But they followed you because you were worth following. I took that from them. I took it from you. Sam's gaze was steady. You can't take what someone carries inside, but you can make it harder for them to share it. I want you to come back, Ryan said quietly. Not for me, not for the investors, for the men. They're learning more from you than I could ever teach. Sam didn't answer right away. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Ryan, and leaned against the table. After a long silence, he said, I don't work for applause, Ryan. I work because building is what I know. If I come back, it's only to finish what I started. And then I go. Ryan nodded. Fair enough. The next morning, just before 7, Sam walked back. Onto the site. There was no announcement, no grand re-entry. He simply put on his hard hat, strapped on his belt, and headed to the monument. The effect was instant. Heads turned. Tools paused mid-air. And then, as if an unspoken signal had passed through the crowd, the work around the monument surged back. To life. Ryan stood off to the side, watching as Sam set the first stone of the day. When the arch finally locked into place, the entire crew seemed to breathe again. And for the first time since he'd taken this job, Ryan felt something heavier than pride. He felt relief that the last week of work on the monument felt different from anything that had come before. The tension that had once gripped the site was gone, replaced by something quieter, steadier, like the hum of a well-tuned engine. Every morning, Sam Whitaker arrived before the others, his hands already dusted with the faint chalk of cement, his eyes scanning the work as if it were a living thing that needed tending. The crew matched his rhythm. No one had to be told to. Double-check measurements or smooth the mortar lines. They did it because they wanted to, because they knew this was no ordinary build. Even men who weren't assigned to the monument would find themselves drawn there, their own tasks forgotten. For a few moments, as they watched the structure rise in careful increments dot by midweek, the arch stood complete, its keystone locking the curve in place like a signature written in stone. Around it, carved blocks began to form low walls that framed a small open plaza. There was no extravagance, no marble facades, no polished steel. It was built of simple, solid materials. But when you stood there, something in the proportions made you feel anchored, as if the space itself had been waiting for you to arrive. On the day of the final stone setting, the entire site seemed to hold its breath. The air was warm but still, the kind of Texas afternoon where the heat presses down without wind to carry it away. Sam knelt, trowel in hand, smoothing the last thin layer of mortar before fitting the final block. His movements were deliberate, ceremonial without trying to be. When he stepped back, there was no applause at first. Just silence. A silence that felt alive. Then, quietly, men began to remove their hard hats. Not because anyone told them to, but because it felt right. Ryan Coleman stood a few feet away, his arms crossed loosely, his expression unreadable. He'd watched the monument take shape day by day, and even now, with the last stone in place, he couldn't fully explain what made it feel different, stronger somehow, not just in structure, but in presence. The following week, the monument was unveiled to the public. There was no ribbon cutting, no speeches from politicians. The investors had suggested a plaque naming Sam as the builder, but he refused. Instead, at the base of the arch, a small bronze plate read, "To all who build, without being seen. To those who teach without raising their voice." Crowds came anyway. Locals wandered in, running their hands along the smooth joints of the stone, standing in the center of the plaza, as if testing the way the space made them feel. A few stayed long, not speaking, just breathing in the stillness. Sam didn't mingle with them. He stood at the far edge of the park, hands in his pockets, watching without a smile, but with a kind of quiet satisfaction. Ryan approached him. For a moment, they stood side by side, both looking at the monument. "There's something I still don't get," Ryan said finally. "You built it. You gave it its soul. Why not let your name be on it?" Sam's eyes stayed on the stone. "Because the things that matter don't need signatures. If they're worth anything, they'll outlast the name anyway." A group of children ran through the arch, their laughter ringing against the walls. One boy stopped, turned to a woman nearby, and asked, "Who built this?" The woman shrugged. "Just a man who knew how to build." Sam's mouth twitched almost a smile. That night, long after the last visitors had left, Sam quietly packed his tools into an old canvas bag. No one saw him go. No one knew where he was headed. But in the weeks that followed, the monument became a place people returned to without knowing why. Workers from the site visited on their days off, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes tracing the lines of the stone like they were reading a familiar book. And Ryan, more than once, found himself there in the early morning, before the city was fully awake, standing beneath the arch with the rising sun spilling through. He never spoke of Sam Whitaker again, but in the stillness of that place, he understood. Some men leave their mark in cement and steel. Others leave it in the people they've changed forever. Sam had done both. "I'm done,"